Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Today's topic is a topic near and dear to my heart. That's pensions and pension reform, because we still need pension reform in the state. It's something I argued with beginning in 2013 when I showed up as a state legislator, where we passed a significant pension reform bill that was later proved to be unconstitutional. Now, for all you public employees who may just want to weigh in on Jeanne Ives' podcast about this particular topic, you know I've always been about pension reform, but I did not vote for that bill. Why? Couple reasons. One, I knew it was unconstitutional, which was proven to be true. Two, it didn't go far enough, because Illinois' state of pensions is still a disaster. It's terrible for taxpayers, as it eats up about 25% of our state budget. It's terrible for local taxpayers, as cities around the state, from Peoria to Danville, have no ability to handle their pensions, even with just 100% of their property taxes going to them. We need pension reform. And it's not the only way that it's being talked about right now in Springfield is pension enhancements. The absolute opposite direction we need to go in this state. We don't need pension enhancements. We need pension reform, constitutional pension reform. So on my podcast with me today is Bryce Hill. Bryce is the Director of Fiscal and Economic Research for the Illinois Policy Institute. Illinois Policy Institute just recently this week put out a article that discusses a poll that they did, and that poll shows that the majority of Illinoisans want constitutional pension reform. And since we've been down this path before, we need to take a deeper dive into it. If it's what the people want, why is it not getting done? I think that question's fairly obvious to most of us. We know that the Democrat legislators, and honestly, some Republicans, are controlled by the public sector unions. They don't want pension reform. But in the end, this is going to become a disaster. Now, Bryce, welcome to the program. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So we are basically going to talk about three particular bills, and these deal with Tier 2. So in 2011, they started up Tier 2, which is significantly different than Tier 1, and it was a way to rein in the pension costs. As a way of background, let me be very brief here. Tier 2 is likely not compliant with Social Security. That determination has never been done. And so what you have seen happening now is people know, Tier 2 employees know that they've been paying into a system that Tier 1 is getting higher benefits for than they are, and that possibly it's not even compliant with Social Security. So over time, you've had favorable legislators put together bills that enhance Tier 2 pensions past what was acceptable in 2011. And so that's what we see happening in these three bills. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the most recent one is being, sold as a Tier 2 fix. I would use the term fix in quotation marks. It doesn't really change anything about funding pensions, but it does seek to try to bring us in compliance with what's known as safe harbor provisions that allow the Illinois pension system to be exempt from participating in Social Security. That has to be resolved one way or another. As you mentioned, there's never been an actuarial analysis done to see whether or not this is the case, and we need that. So I'm totally against the bills that are being pushed right now that are claiming to fix this problem, because one, we don't know what the problem is currently, and we don't know what the cost of these reforms is ultimately going to be. Senator Robert Marwick, the chief proponent of the bill, was asked about this by Crane Chicago Business, and simply put, he said he didn't know. He said for sure it would be billions, but he couldn't tell us exactly how much. So a lot of stuff happening in Springfield, as you mentioned, Tier 2 benefits, seeking to expand them, but no actual solutions.
Yeah, so I do find that's interesting, because that's the same argument that happened in 2013 on the House floor. I directly asked Speaker Madigan, what is the cost associated with this quote unquote pension reform, and how much is it going to save? He had no idea. They slopped through it after really like 2 years of intensive discussion about pension reform. And then when the bill got on the floor, they had no idea how much they were going to save. And the reverse is happening here in these bills. The testimony is that they have no idea how much it's going to cost in addition. So one of the bills, actually what it does is it changes a significant feature of Tier 2 pensions, which was to rein in the cost of living, compounded cost of living increase of 3%. And so what this bill does, it says it's supposed to be, tier 2 said 3% or 1/2 of CPI. This bill goes fully to CPI. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. So this is for the issue we're running into with tier 2 right now is that Social Security has a wage base, and tier 2 has a pensionable salary cap. The Social Security wage base grows with inflation. Our tier 2 cap does not, and so over time there's been a division happening. There's been a growing split between the cap on pensionable salaries and Social Security's wage base, and the fear is that despite the generous benefits that come with the pension in Illinois, that they're not enough to offset the deficit that's been created between the Social Security wage base and the pensionable salary cap. So this bill changes pensionable salary cap, indexes things to full CPI rather than the 3% or half of CPI, whichever is less. So it would make those changes, try to bring them in line. But as we said, we don't really know what the ultimate effects of that are going to be other than to cost taxpayers more money.
Absolutely true. So SB 1690 is the one that is a change for Cook County wage base increase to Social Security cap. Right now, it's about 123,000 is the wage base, but the Social Security wage base is 160,000. That's a significant increase in pensionable salary benefits. That's going to be a huge impact. Trust me. Then you had SB 1629, and that basically changes what the wages are that you look at to create that initial salary cap. So maybe you're not making 160,000, maybe you're not making 123,000, maybe you're making 100,000. And so tier 1 said, look, we're going to look at the last 4 years and we're going to, basically base your pension on that. Tier 2 said, oh no, we're going to look at the last 10 years and take the average of the highest 8 years. And this takes tier 2 back to tier 1, looking at 48 months. That's a huge increase in pensionable salary. And then you had SB 1630, and that is the one that changes it to the COLA, the cost of living increase, is simply going to be CPI. And it appears to me that bill has no cap. So that means if the CPI last year officially by the Illinois Department of Revenue was 7%, does that mean they literally would get a 7% COLA?
Yeah, that's what 1630 would do. It would swap in the old cap with full CPI. 1629, as you mentioned, changes the final average salary calculation. And the ironic part here is that tier 2 was designed intentionally to do these things that are now being changed. Tier 2 pensioners were given the short end of the stick. We've seen previous analysis that showed that tier 2 was actually, at least during times when markets were performing well, paying for itself and actually subsidizing tier 1, meaning tier 2 pensioners contribute about 9% of their salary to their pension, but only 7% was necessary to fund their benefits. The 2% or 20-something percent of the payment that they were making was actually going to subsidize tier 1, which would actually require about 20% of your salary to go to pensions to pay for them, compared to the 9% that's being paid right now. So tier 2 is always designed to pay out lesser benefits. They're going back and changing that now, making it very similar to tier 1. It's going to absolutely balloon unfunded pension liabilities, reduce funding ratios, and we're already at perilous levels right now.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that at least one of these bills only applies to Cook County, and the other 2 bills only applies to firefighters in the state. And so does that leave everybody out of, so your state employees, state university employees, teacher retirement system, legislators, which we don't care about, they shouldn't get a pension anyway. But all of them are not going to be getting these same benefits. So what they're doing is they're breaking the dam. They're saying, well, you did it for firefighters. Now we're going to come back and next year we're going to do it for teachers and then state employees and all that. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's actually already happened. The dam's kind of already been broken. During 2019, when downstate police and fire pensions were consolidated, these types of changes were included in that consolidation. And so the argument right now being made is that downstate firemen got this benefit Chicago firemen deserve the same thing. Cook County, which is one of the worst funded pension systems, is arguing that they need to do this to become compliant with federal law because they're anticipating a potential lawsuit. So kind of two reasons that it's being done right now. One, the firemen's argument is that it's already been a promise that's been made to downstate that Chicago should receive. And the Cook County is the threat of lawsuits due to safe harbor provisions. So the dam's kind of already been broken in a way, but you're right, we haven't seen these changes applied. Hasn't happened to the statewide systems.
It's not happened to the statewide systems, which is interesting. So it's happened at the local level. And all of this, what it does is it drives up property taxes. That's 100% what it does. And when you've got cities like the city of Springfield spending 100% of the property taxes collected just on pensions, plus additional money has to go into it, what you find is happening in places like, Peoria and Danville and elsewhere. What they're having to do is they're adding on an additional fee to their utility bills because they can't also afford these pensions. And so whether it comes in a property tax increase or a fee increase, you're going to be paying the brunt of this for the damage that these legislators are doing down there.
Without a doubt, yes. Yeah, without a doubt, it even gets a little bit more serious than that. Locals have to deal with the pension problem. The state is also dealing with the pension problem. As you mentioned, these haven't been applied to the statewide systems. When they do, it's sure to balloon costs. In the past 20 years, virtually the only area of the state budget that's grown when adjusted for inflation has been spending on pensions. That spending is up 584% over the past 20 years. Other spending on,
So wait, 584%.
584% growth in pensions. We've seen roughly a doubling in employee and retiree healthcare costs. Then we've seen about a 20% increase in education, and then all other spending, we've actually seen decreases. So when you break it out that way, virtually the only areas of the budget that are growing are associated with retiree and debt costs, and other areas of the budget are getting choked out, which means fewer state dollars going there. Locals are making up for that with higher property taxes on top of having to raise their own property taxes to pay for their own property or their own pension problems.
Okay, since we're talking, we kind of moved into state budget, which is great. I'm just going to add a little data point here because it's just absolutely alarming. But a program instituted 3 years ago for non-citizen health care that was projected to be only $2 million. This year, the cost is expected to be nearly $1 billion or 495 times the amount that was projected 3 years ago. I mean, this is an outrageous expense. Where's that, what's that billion doing? Crowding out all sorts of other spending that they want to do for the Democrat programs. So yeah, we've got a lot of problems with the budget. That's also one of them. Let's go to Chicago though, because I think people should be alarmed by the Chicago numbers. So Chicago has a $33 billion unfunded pension liability. The firefighters, the firefighter unions, working with Senator Mark Wick, are behind these pension enhancements. Yet at the same time, that Chicago Firemen's Pension Fund is only 20.9% funded. That is ripe for just going into default. But they just think that they're going to continue to find the money elsewhere, continue to tax the citizens out of their home and their businesses, and they're always going to get what they think that they're owed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when you look at there's a really great research organization called the Equitable Institute, and they look at public pension systems nationwide. And when you look at public employee pension systems, Chicago in the bottom 10, all 5 of the major Chicago systems are in the bottom 10 for the worst funded. Chicago Firemen's is the worst funded. It's only ahead of a retirement fund in Providence, Rhode Island. Rhode Island historically has had its own pension issues. We've seen localities in Rhode Island actually default on their pensions and pension benefits be slashed. That's another interesting point I think that needs to be brought up, and kind of how we should be addressing the topic is the retirement security of people who think that the pensions are always going to be there. That's not necessarily the case. We've seen it happen in other localities. We're at risk of it happening here. So if we don't actually get serious about writing things, turning around the debt, stuff like that, the retirements and pensions that people have been promised and think that they're due to receive aren't necessarily going to be there, and that's going to create a whole host of other problems. So it's a taxpayer issue, it's a public retiree issue. It really affects everybody, and everybody should be on board with pension reform uh, if we care about actually delivering on our promises.
Yeah, I just don't think that people believe that, nor especially the pensioners. I don't think that they think that always that the state will pony up the money and that they have this constitutional guarantee that they can always be backed by. And meanwhile, what's going to happen is taxpayers are just going to leave at some point. I mean, the growth in the pension costs it's something most people don't understand. They don't understand anything about this topic. So I'm glad that you're on here discussing this topic. So constitutional pension reform, which should be very easy to pass. And I think if you actually put it to a referendum, which is where it needs to go, just like they wanted a progressive tax increase, they could have they do that. They tried to do that via referendum. Let's put a referendum in to change the Constitution so that we can have constitutional pension reform. And there's two different phases of this. The first one should be that just because you entered the system, let's say in 2008, and you're still in that system, does that really mean that you can't have your pension adjusted in 2024, for example, for anything that you earn past that time frame? Sure, you get what you get from the time that you entered until we do it. But going forward, we should be able to adjust pensions. That should be a constitutional reform. That is not what the judges decided. The Supreme Court decided that the minute you enter a pension system, you get that benefit until, you leave that pension system. So that's one point that we could do actually a constitutional change on. The other thing that we could do without doing anything, we don't even need a referendum for this. All new hires immediately, when you're hired now into any of the pension systems, state or local, you immediately go into a 401k style program and Social Security. I mean, should be done tomorrow, and it could be done tomorrow in Springfield.
Yeah, and Springfield actually passed a similar reform. Is kind of labeled Tier 3, which is similar. I mean, it was a hybrid plan, similar to what the state university employees system has employed for a while now, and it would hopefully be able to satisfy safe harbor provisions and save the state money and realign the burdens of who's responsible for retirements to the governing bodies that are responsible for the pensions, as well as put some onus back on the pensioners themselves to accept the responsibility for the risk of the system.
So I proposed that actual legislation. I put it in writing, and I ran the IPI bill on that. It did get passed, but my bill was that it mandated new hires, and this bill is an optional one where they could go into a system like SURS, which is actually successfully for now over 25 years had its own 401k style program that over 20,000 employees have, just voluntarily opted into. Why? Because they want control over their own money. They don't want the state to have control, and they want the flexibility that comes with a 401k style program. Because one thing that's never really touched on is, like, at least for a teacher, if you're not in the system for 10 years, you don't get anything back but your contributions. You get no investment returns, nothing at all. You get only your contributions back. And that's not fair in a modern society where people like to move jobs and they move from state to state and they want to take that investment earnings with them, like you can in a private sector program where you can bring all your 401k, including the investments, the interest earned with you. So, I mean, we need to modernize everything because it's actually the right thing to do for employees. So, what do you think? I mean, I think these bills that we talked about, these three bills, these pension enhancement bills, rather than pension reform bills, I think they're just going to fly through. No problem.
Yeah, we'll see. They so far, yeah, they've gone through, relatively unscathed. We'll see if I'm not optimistic, I would say, as one is naturally with Springfield. So yeah, not necessarily bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about this one.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This is Bryce Hill. He's the Director of Fiscal and Economic Research at the Illinois Policy Institute. We thank you for joining us on this podcast. It's been really informative. Keep up the good work over at IPI. And we'll have you back on to talk more about fiscal policy in the state of Illinois, because that's what we have to get back to talking about. There's a lot of issues that have occupied people's time. And I agree, the gun issue, crime, those are big issues too. But certainly the fiscal health of the state is something that we need to talk about at every turn. So thank you so much for joining me, Bryce.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you.
And that's The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Thank you so much for joining me. You can catch our podcast on AM 560's podcast list, on our website at breakthrough-ideas.com, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and elsewhere.